Welcome to the Wild Ag Podcast, where we'll serve as a connection point for landowners and conservation professionals who want to integrate conservation and agriculture. I'm Dr. Andrew Little, Professor of Landscape Ecology and Habitat Management and Extension Specialist at the University of Nebraska.
And I'm Nate Pfluger, Precision Ag Coordinator for Pheasants Forever and an avid outdoorsman with friends and family in my free time. Together, we'll work to bring you perspectives from both landowners and conservation professionals for discussions on soil, water, and wildlife in ag-dominated landscapes.
Welcome back to the Wild Ag Podcast. My name is Dr. Andrew Little here. I'm with my co-host, Nathan Pfluger with Pheasants Forever. Today, we have the great opportunity to talk a little bit about Open Fields and Waters program and the NCAP program, and as well as some other programs here in Nebraska. We have Adam Kester with Game and Parks, Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and then we have Addie Piernicky here with Pheasants Forever. And so we'll get Adam here if you want to give a little bit of background about who you are, what you do in your position, and then we'll talk to Addie as well.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me today. I'm Adam Kester. I'm our Access Program Manager for the Nebraska Game and Parks. I oversee our access efforts, especially on private lands statewide in the state of Nebraska. I'm located in North Platte, but do operate statewide.
Awesome. Addie, tell us about yourself and kind of what you do in your role.
Yeah, no, thank you. Excited to be here. So I am a coordinating wildlife biologist with Pheasants Forever. I'm based out of Ogallala, and I'm specifically working on the Nebraska Community Access Partnership that's focused on providing bonuses for folks who enroll in public access.
That's awesome. Yeah, looking forward to today's discussion. I think we have a lot of cool topics to discuss. So Nathan, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so my first question to you guys is, obviously we have a number of programs here in Nebraska that deal with public access on private lands. Why are these programs so important in Nebraska?
You know, Nebraska is 97% privately owned. Trying to find a place to hunt can be difficult, and it is one of the biggest challenges to recruiting hunters, you know, into the sport. And so working with private landowners in Nebraska is critical to keeping those opportunities out there. We've got multiple programs that do provide some opportunity for hunters. And, you know, our flagship program, which I imagine we'll talk a lot about today, is our Open Fields and Waters program, or our OFW program for short. And in general, that program provides, you know, over 435,000 acres of available habitats to legal hunters to access those properties without having to ask the landowner or gain permission. Essentially, their $100 are at work in that program, and so when it comes to private lands in Nebraska, our programs to provide that opportunity is pretty critical.
That's awesome.
How do we stack up against other states? So you mentioned that Nebraska's 97% privately owned. What about our surrounding states?
Right. So a lot of Midwest states kind of fall in that same ballpark. As a matter of fact, over the state habitat meeting, I was kind of given a presentation about, you know, the Midwest and you know, how we fall in line with access, kind of right along the lines of your question there. But, you know, Nebraska is 1.1% federally owned. Kansas is just over 0.5%. You know, Iowa and Missouri are like 0.3%. And so, I mean, it's very little of the landscape is federally owned, you know, and not even all of those, you know, acres that are federally owned are open year round as well, or open to hunting. And so in comparison to a lot of our Western neighbors, you know, Colorado's like 36% federally owned. You jump up to Wyoming and it's almost half of the state. I mean, like 48%, I believe, is what that figure is. So when it comes to available public land, you know, we're not the top of the charts by any means. And so our private lands programs are really the opportunity we have to bring that opportunity, you know, to the table for hunters.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that speaks to the, we talk a lot about, especially in our lab, how do we find ways to balance conservation and ag landscapes? And as you mentioned, 97 plus percent privately owned. It's all comes down to those private landowners to really make that change. You're not going to make that monumental change per se just on that little 1% or 1.1%. Yes, you can have some impact, but that's obviously a very, very small piece of that larger pie. So it's really critical. And that's where you guys with the Private Lands Division have done a phenomenal job in being able to work with producers along with PF and other organizations to be able to find those opportunities to help them out economically, but then also opening up opportunities for hunters to get out there in a state that's predominantly privately owned.
You mentioned that states west of us tend to have higher percentage of publicly owned land. Would you say that's because there's rougher terrain out there? I mean, it's harder to actually make a living off these acres, or why is that?
A lot of it's owned by either BLM or the National Forest. There's many different, federal agencies that own land. And, over time, they continue to add to those. I wish I could recite the history a little better, but I know it was in the earlier 1900s, a lot of those states gained their federal ground, and it's been that way ever since. And so, Nebraska, a heavily ag-based state, we're going to get preference, for production for the most part. And so we weren't ever granted, the large tracts. We do have, like the Bessie Ranger District at Halsey, we've got McKelvey, we've got Crescent Lake. There is some federal land in Nebraska, but in comparison, it's very minimal compared to the Western states.
Yeah.
So when did the Nebraska Game and Parks, or Pheasants Forever, when did we start actively pursuing open acres to public access?
Sure. So little history. So our Open Fields and Waters program is our private lands access program now. But when it started, there was actually a CRP map program that opened CRP to walk-in hunting, and it was specifically targeted just for CRP acres, so acres enrolled in the Conservation Reserve Program that's administered through FSA and NRCS in the USDA. And that started in 1998. And in those years, there was a lot of CRP on the landscape, and Andy and Nathan and Addie can probably, talk to this even more, but our available CRP was much more in the 90s than it is now. And so we did have a pretty good following, pretty good interest in that CRP map program. But what we learned over time is that there was a lot of other areas on the farm that were worth hunting, and other areas that, folks were pursuing for those opportunities. And so not long after, in 2009, we actually created the Open Fields and Waters program. That started us enrolling, other parts of the farm, creating higher rates for pasture or other big game opportunities, or really just kind of opening the door to wherever that opportunity is.
That's really cool. Yeah. So are there places within the state that you kind of have, it's conservation takes time. So just even connections and building trust with, landowners and others, is there places in the state that you have like really good participation, and then other places maybe not so much yet, but obviously you guys are actively working to kind of grow that in those areas? Yeah.
So we do. We do have multiple initiatives across the state, and I'll let Addie take the NCAP discussion for sure, but I'll touch on a couple others. So we do have, partnerships with NRDs. So for instance, we've got the Lower Loop NRD. They're actually matching our access payment dollar for dollar on any CRP acres that we get in the Lower Loop NRD, and so in that area, which is kind of central Nebraska, if you were to look at the state in general and put your finger about right in the middle of it, generally that's the Lower Loop NRD. And so in that area, if a producer is interested in enrolling CRP and OFW, they'll get $20 an acre from us if it's high quality CRP. And then the NRD will also match that for an additional $20 an acre. So, that's just one example of how a partner can step in and really help amplify
that's awesome.
The offerings that we can give, to a landowner to try to get into the program. Another big initiative we have is our burger and plan for pheasants, which I know you all have talked about it, in past podcasts, but basically this is our statewide effort to try to boost hunting opportunities for pheasant hunters, try to boost habitat for pheasants, obviously, and obviously trying to help that population out in those focal areas across the state. And we're implementing this burger and plan in, I believe it's 9 separate areas across the state. And we're offering incentives to get into CRP, but also to put that CRP into walk-in. And we also help with management and things like that. So hopefully making those decisions to put more habitat on the ground is a little easier. And the financial burden is maybe eased some with working through us.
That's awesome.
That's a couple
really cool.
opportunities, a couple examples.
No, that's great.
So it sounds like the dollar and cents is really the driving factor of getting acres enrolled. Addie, from your experience, I know you've worked in a couple areas of the state enrolling property into public access. Are there any other barriers outside of the dollars to getting landowners enrolled?
I think it's perception of the program. There's some people who still think there's liability associated with it, and folks are protected from liability with the Nebraska Recreational Liability Act.
Oh, sure.
So if they are providing public access or not taking payment for public access or hunting, there's no liability. So some folks, they think someone's going to walk on the property, trip, fall, get sued. And that is a concern. They might have family members that come home and hunt. Maybe they have young children, they want to participate. So most of the barriers, though, it just seems some misconceptions of the program, I think.
Yep, and that's to me where you have conversations.
Yes,
you got to build trust, and we talked about that in some previous podcast episodes of just thinking about how to just sit down. A lot of times, I think unfortunately in today's society we get a lot of polarization of things, and so, but a lot of that is when you start sitting down and just sit down and have that conversation, have a cup of coffee, and talk about some of these things, and then you find common ground or opportunities there, and you're like, oh, I didn't realize that, and so that's part of this podcast as well, is kind of addressing any misconceptions that may be out there, and so it's great to be able to highlight things like that. So
going back to protecting the landowner, say that somebody trips and falls or gets hurt on their property while they're out there hunting, has that always been in place, or is that something that we've had to work towards to get for those landowners?
So the Nebraska Recreation Liability Act, I'm going to have to pull my brochure to actually figure out what year they passed that.
I don't know it.
On the spot here, but I'll find that. But basically, that was passed to help protect those producers that are allowing folks to hunt without charging them. I mean, they're not discriminating against anyone, and so it's a big benefit to our Open Fields and Waters program that essentially this is the only way you can attain income through your hunting rights, but also be covered under the Recreation Liability Act, because you're not picking and choosing who's going. You're not discriminating against anybody. You're allowing folks to walk in and hunt on your property without getting permission. And so that act is going to cover you. No different than if you own private land and you say, no, I don't want to be in the Open Fields and Waters program, but I'll let folks hunt, and you're not charging them. So as long as there's no monetary exchange, essentially that act, can kind of be the fallback liability wise.
Sure, which is good.
So is there any sort of research that ties retaining hunters to the opportunities that they have before them? So if they're in an area where they don't have a lot of public access, they don't own land, they're probably not as likely to hunt. Am I correct in assuming that? Is there any research that backs that up?
Oh, for sure. As a matter of fact, there was the National Shooting Sports Foundation. They put out a survey every few years, and the most recent one I have was, I believe, from 2023. But the top 2 reasons why folks chose not to hunt were not enough access and not enough places to hunt. And so of all of the influencers that they could pick, those were the top 2. And so the overwhelming support for access and areas to hunt is there from the hunting community. And we know that just even through our own hunter satisfaction surveys that 3 out of 5 upland hunters survey saying that they utilize public land throughout the season. So it's pretty critical that we have those opportunities through the programs. And I'm a public land hunter myself. Without having it fairly close by, you wouldn't have those 2:00 afternoons that a appointment gets canceled. And, hey, I can run out. I'm going to go chase a bird for a little bit, So that's, being in Western Nebraska, we're pretty fortunate that way. But there's a lot of areas in the state the same. So,
yeah, no, I think that really further illustrates the importance of the programs that you guys have. When access is a major issue, a major barrier for folks. If you want to break that barrier down, having things where you can get access is so critical. So that's great.
So before we jump into program specifics, do we have an acre count of how many total acres are open to public access at this point across all of our programs?
Sure. So we're right around 1.1 million, and that changes a little bit here and there, but that includes obviously all of our open fields and waters areas. It includes a lot of our partner lands, includes our federal land. When I say partner lands, I say Ducks Unlimited, they own some ground that they allow access on. Platte River Basin Environments, they're a group out of the Scottsbluff area that they open a bunch of ground. We all obviously have a bunch of public land, through the state, through our game and parks, all of our wildlife management areas. There's a fair amount there, but again, in comparison to other states, we're not, we're not in a position to really argue. So, but we're working on it, and that, awesome. To me, that's a big opportunity for us to grow.
Well, just Adam, I guess just thinking about that growth, say I'm just picking a number, but since some of the OFW program started to now, has it been a fairly steady increase over time and just acreage, each year? If you guys are, getting producers and landowners involved in the program, or?
Yeah. And so actually, to be honest, our 10-year trend is a constant increase.
That's awesome.
The last, we just sent a mailer out, and I wish I had the statistic right here. Now I'll find it too. But we've gained 200,000 acres. I want to believe in the last 6 years, 5-6 years.
Wow!
And so a lot of that has come from initiatives like the NCAP initiative or Bergeron plan has really incentivized the access options. Our partners like the Lower Loop, they've been great. We've got a lot of people that kind of have an eye on opportunity, and so it's been good.
Sure. That's awesome. That's cool.
So drilling down into the OFW or Open Fields and Water program a little more, you said that program started in 93. Is that?
I think it was 98.
The CRP MAP program started in 1998.
Oh, 98. Actually. Okay.
And then the Open Fields and Waters program, which now includes all habitat types, was started in 2009. So that expanded to all areas of the farm. We basically put it on our biologists to find the opportunity. I'm a hunter. I always look at it as if I would hunt that, other hunters would. Let's enroll it.
Sure.
And we pay based upon habitat type, and so. Obviously areas with accretion ground that's going to have timber for whitetails is going to be, a higher dollar per acre because the demand is there.
Sure.
CRP, obviously there's a lot of demand there. It's a long season. We've got a great rich heritage of pheasant hunting in Nebraska. There's going to be a lot of people looking for that. And so, we've got a lot of demand there. So we pay more there. We do pay for grouse hunting opportunities. A lot of those are grazed rangelands. And so we're going to be looking, at, in most cases between 10 and 30% of what a CRP payment would be, because it takes more ground, typically, actively grazed ground. the opportunity is going to be less, but it's still an opportunity we want to provide. So we pay respectfully.
That's really good.
So is the OFW program a partnership program from the sense that multiple agencies or organizations are bringing dollars together, or where do those funds come from?
Sure. So majority of the funds are hunter-derived funds. And so when a hunter walks in and they buy a habitat stamp and a hunting license, a portion of that goes into match towards our Pittman-Robertson funds. Which I'm sure you guys have all explained that, but basically that's the 11% excise tax put on hunting equipment, guns, and ammo. And so if you go buy a box of shotgun shells, 11% of that goes into a fund that then gets distributed to states that more or less can come up with $1. They'll get $3 out of that fund, if that makes sense. And so we utilize that funding for this program, heavily. The voluntary public access grant through USDA, the VPA HIP grant, that's been really big. As a matter of fact, we were awarded a good amount of funding for the next 2 years from that in the last farm bill. We're still awaiting on the next one, but that definitely gives us room to grow there. So,
sure.
Things are really good there. But we do get other funds, from partners. I partnered with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation this year on another access program. So it's part of our access budget, but that's one. Pheasants Forever is obviously a major partner for us to push the program. As far as funding wise, they certainly help and chip in on some funding there. But the biggest help there is they help administer the program. A lot of their staff in USDA offices are promoting the program. Obviously, Addie's Pheasants Forever, she's promoting the program. They wrote a grant that's incentivizing enrolling in the program. So, there's a lot of moving parts with how we operate the program, and it takes a lot of partners, takes a lot of people, and ultimately a lot of funding. And last year, $1.8 million to be exact.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it's cool to see all those partnerships working together. I think that's been one of the coolest parts from coming from out of state, coming here several years ago, is all the different organizations are partnering together, knowing that that's how you're going to advance conservation, especially in a predominantly privately owned state.
Sure.
So I'm kind of curious. So like if a landowner is interested, can you guys like kind of walk through the process for OFW and like what they would do and just kind of like some of those steps? I'm just kind of curious, like how does that work? Especially if there's any listeners out there that are actually like, hey, this sounds like an interesting program.
Yeah. So a lot of times I'll get a call. Oh, saw a flyer. I saw someone told me about this in the USDA office. I'm interested, but not sure how the program works. And I'm like, yep. Like you can meet me in my office, or I'm happy to go to the site and kind of talk about our opportunities. We also have information on the Nebraska Game and Parks website, as well as the Pheasants Forever website related to Open Fields and Waters program. But mostly it's just a call and then an in-person discussion.
Okay.
What are the goals of the producer? Is this going to work on their property? Is there access to all, is it easily accessed, or do we have to go through someone's yard?
Sure.
What is the quality of the habitat? What would our payments be? And those are really great questions that usually we can help give a pretty good idea of our assessment when we go out there and check it out. So it's a very, very in-person, personable kind of conversation.
Sure. That's really cool.
Yeah, once people are interested, we have a very simple contract that we kind of map it out on our GIS survey, and we calculate the payments, and they sign with a W-9, and depending on how many years they're interested in enrolling, we move forward with that.
So with the years, so like, do you have like, is there like a specific, like I think about like CRP, some of the, it could be like that's like a 10-year contract. So like in this case, is it like a 1 year or a 3 year, like, or is it really just kind of what they want, or is there any limits in that time frame in which you guys allow, how long they can or cannot be type thing?
From as far as I understand, it usually goes from 1 to 5.
1 to 5, okay.
So some people would just want to test it out.
Sure, yeah.
And we'll get into more kind of the NCAP association with the years there. But most time, it depends on the cover. So like CRP, if after they do year one and they're like, oh, this is great, we want to continue, they might want to have a longer contract just so they don't have to write it every year.
Oh, sure.
And then we also have our stubble program that enrolls within our burger and pheasant opportunity areas, or our focus on pheasant area, like in southwest Nebraska. We have stubble that we sign up. So it has to be 14 inches tall and either like milo or wheat stubble, mostly for upland game. Although I have seen people harvest some pretty nice bucks in stubble before, especially out of those pockets. If you're actually willing to walk a little, you'd be surprised what hides in there. Every now and then, I wish I had a rifle when I was out upland game bird hunting. So
Giving away your secrets.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't give them all away. But we do 1-year contracts for those. Yeah.
Oh, cool. And then that data, so that goes in, like, for example, you have a stubble like atlas essentially, and then similarly for the public atlas you guys have for the OFW lands, that goes in there as well in a sense. So then people could, hunters who want to be able to find those locations can easily find that.
Yeah. I always suggest if you're in the area that does have our stubble access program, you just get the stubble guide because the public Access Atlas. Unfortunately, it's published before our stubble is all in.
Oh, sure.
So if you're going there, it has a great little addendum. The state guide's great in general, but there's a lot more. You'd be amazed. You think, there's a few sites here and there, and then you get the stubble, and you're like, wow, it just lights up the page, and it's usually like a purplish color.
When do those materials usually come out? The public
is that August? Usually late August, I think.
So kind of our goal every year is to have it out by the state fair. The book atlas.
Sure,
and so typically that last week of August is when most vendors get them.
Okay.
Yep. And then our stubble guide, we typically have it out like first or second week of October in time for guys to be able to scout some of those sites prior to the pheasant opener later in the month.
Oh, okay. Sure.
And for the Open Fields and Water program, we've been talking really mainly about hunting opportunities, but there's also fishing opportunities, right? And then another question kind of tacked onto there, can you use these properties just for hiking or bird watching? Does it have to be hunting related activities?
Right. So, generally we're paying those landowners to let folks walk in and hunt. And the dollars that are used to pay that landowner are dollars derived directly from a hunter. And so we restrict the activities just to hunting, for that reason, that the agreement with the landowner is saying you're going to allow folks to walk in and hunt, no bike riding, horseback riding, target shooting, camping, things like that. And so that's part of the stipulations we do put in the agreement. If the landowner gives permission, or is posted otherwise, then that's totally on them. But nearly all of our properties are administered, for the hunter, and that's kind of how we keep it. So it's pretty understandable for everybody.
That's really cool. I'm curious, is there any we talked about misconceptions earlier. Is there any barriers or common questions, frequently asked questions that landowners have? I'm sure there are. That you guys have seen across the program, that they have maybe concerns or things like that you guys have been able to address that we could address here today?
I'll let Adam also answer this, but are people just going to drive around all over my property? Yeah, that's the big one. So anybody can hunt. Yes, anybody can hunt. And it's, they have to have a permit and they need to be walking. And then, the concern, if there's all these people out there, how am I going to manage that? And, you kind of just have to let, usually if there's a hunter hunting one site, I'm going to go to another place, Sure. I don't want to have the competition. So it's not like a million people show up one day and hunt your site. So that's the common misconception, too. That's just going to be like 1,900 people on your site that week. And in certain times of the year get more popular. So usually the first 2 weekends for the opener of pheasant is popular, and then the 9-day rifle season. But you'd be surprised after that. It'll be a trickle.
Sure.
Depending on people's interests. I guess, Adam, any other ones I didn't list there?
No, I'd say those are good ones that we definitely get. Another one that we get pretty consistently is, do I have to enroll my whole property?
Oh,
and so something that I definitely encourage landowners to do is, hey, pick that property that you normally give permission on or that you don't really watch. It's not an area that you and family typically hunt.
Sure.
Let's test it out there. And if you wish to grow, acres on your agreement, we can do that in the future. Nothing's legally binding. And so that's one thing that we try to, encourage folks, like, hey, we're not looking to enroll everything and including your backyard.
Sure.
Nobody would want that. And so
Sure.
only do what you're comfortable. This is 100% a voluntary program. And so, the reason we have success is that we've got folks like Addie or like some of the others out, pushing the program, addressing these things to try to help fit the program to fit, to their needs.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I like the flexibility point, because you said like you could be a year, like a contract for a year. And it's like, I'm going to test it out, because I think that's one of the challenges sometimes for adoption of different, programs and things like that. It's like, oh, I got to be locked in for a really substantial amount of time. But, it's an opportunity to kind of test the waters, like you said, and maybe like it's the back 40 that we don't really use or whatever, that kind of thing. And I think it's just a great opportunity to get people that, or get an opportunity for that landowner, and then obviously get opportunities for others who want to be able to take and get out and they just don't have access somewhere. Seems kind of a, really easy way to do that and at least try it out. So.
Is there flexibility within the OFW program? Say a landowner wanted to keep the 9-day rifle season for their family. Is there an option for that?
We do have that option through the Open Fields and Waters program, that they can exclude the 9-day rifle season. That does reduce their payment significantly. Mainly because that is, a large part of, a hunter's interest is the 9-day rifle season for the most part. Or better way to put it, we have a lot of demand for the 9-day rifle season and properties enrolled there. And so we do have the option for folks to exclude the 9-day rifle season. They can elect to pick spring turkey only if they wish to. We've got an ice fishing and a regular fishing only option if they'd like. And we do see some of those, which we mark differently in the Atlas, or if you've got Onyx, or if you're on our interactive Atlas or Google Earth, you'll be able to see the differences there between a property that's open for all species and seasons versus, a property that's, got the 9-day season closed or spring turkey only.
And so obviously the OFW program has had a lot of success. So is that what has spurred Nebraska Game and Parks, Pheasants Forever, to create other public access programs like NCAP?
Definitely. And Addie can give a great background of the history of NCAP, but it was kind of a conversation that spurred from an idea that our neighbors to the north, South Dakota, had. And so we're always looking for ways that we can increase, our opportunity, on the landscape, especially private lands in Nebraska. We know the more places that are available to hunt, the more hunters we're going to have. Obviously, the more opportunity. Game populations always flux up and down. That's the benefit of trying to manage wild populations. But one thing we can control is obviously opportunity, and a lot of that is through our available programs. But I'll let Addie touch on the NCAP history and kind of how that came about.
Yeah, so the Aberdeen Coalition up in South Dakota. So history of that really quick. What happened was over 3 years, I think between 2010 and 2013, they lost about $17 million in revenue from the loss of pheasant hunting due to a variety of factors, mostly lack of opportunities, contracts coming out of CRP, maybe some sod busting. So the Farm Bill biologist got up there, worked with local businesses. They came up with incentives to encourage folks to enroll in public access and provide, I think, some habitat benefit as well. That has since morphed into the Pheasants Forever Path program. So that path is path public access to habitat. And so they They started this really awesome thing in just one county with Aberdeen Coalition, and now it's grown to the whole state. We really liked the model. They were looking at, providing bonuses to enroll 10 years of new access. And we kind of liked that model, but we wanted to kind of switch it a little bit around and focus on some areas that we know we have amazing game opportunities. We have a lot of amenities, a town that's excited about it, so we were focusing on Ogallala. And we wanted to kind of tweak it enough so that it'll work for Nebraska, right? So that's kind of how the Nebraska Community Access Program got funded. We worked with Game and Parks, wrote a grant, submitted it to the Nebraska Environmental Trust, and got awarded $800,000.
Awesome.
And we were fortunate enough to have other people who saw the excitement of this. And so Onyx also donated another $50,000.
Wow, that's awesome.
And our local chapters as well have been supportive.
That's really cool.
Yeah, up in Aberdeen, South Dakota, $17 million in 3 years.
Wow.
That's pretty crazy.
And that's just like the direct number. That's not even extrapolated, as you know.
Sure.
It usually is through, how that affects the community. I mean,
oh, yeah.
I couldn't imagine just one county losing that much.
And that was just the business owners saying, hey, we need to do something about this.
So it was actually the Farm Bill biologist meeting with, so I think he had been retired from another, wildlife-specific agency and became a Farm Bill biologist, saw what was happening, knew that, community-led efforts are some of the best ways to improve a community, right?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
So that's, they came up with an idea, everybody was on board, and it worked.
Yeah. No, I think it's such a cool example of being able to model something like that now here in Nebraska. Because ultimately, like you said, a lot of these small towns, they're in Nebraska, and you may have a few hundred people, for example, in them, and a lot of them, of course, are very ag dominated. That's what kind of the industry that keeps them alive. But just thinking about that kind of rural vitality, and I know like here in Nebraska, UNL, they have that Rural Vitality Institute here, and it's really focused on that rural prosperity of how can we take and revitalize some of these small communities. And that's just another example of an opportunity where you can partner with those different businesses, because like it or not, during the hunting season, there's a number of businesses that maybe not necessarily fully reliant on hunters, but that's a big component of their business. And so finding ways that you can constantly, strengthen that community is that's a cool example. And it's really interesting, especially from Aberdeen, to see how much of an impact that would be. Mm-hmm. So that's cool.
So when did we roll out the Nebraska Community Access Program here in Ogallala?
So I think the grant was awarded last February, and then they came up with a name, I think, in March, and started providing incentives in April. I came on, I believe, in May, and since then we've had some wonderful support with our Game and Parks biologists. And we're not just new access. We do provide these incentives to people who are currently in public access. We didn't want to not give that bonus to people who are already providing us, assistance with getting access to hunting. But we do require them to sign a 5-year public access agreement. So everyone does have 5 years of walk-in hunting associated with their contract if you're receiving the NCAP bonus. Yeah, so that program started in just basically 1 year.
Wow.
Yeah, coming up on a year then.
Yeah,
right?
That's awesome.
So has the community responded well? Have they reached out and wanted to help build this program?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of community support. Ogallala has been great, working with the Keith Chamber of Commerce there, the Rotary Club, really getting some of the words out. So we're looking at other opportunities to work with them and get more promotions, but they've been a wonderful resource.
That's awesome. So can you kind of walk through, similar to the OFW, like, if there's landowners or businesses that are interested in partnering, like what does that process kind of look like, and how are you and or kind of like what's your daily kind of job in that sense in your role?
Yeah, so basically, anyone that's interested in public access, I may get a call about.
Sure.
So depending on where it is, I might call a local Game and Parks biologist who may have worked with that producer in the past, because we're all about building relationships, right? And sometimes it can be confusing if you're working with multiple people. So if I already know that so-and-so is enrolled stubble with one of our biologists in Southwest Nebraska, well, I want him to work with them.
Correct.
And, I can still be in the process.
Yeah.
But I can write agreements, and So I get a variety of emails. We might have like some partnership opportunities with some other businesses. We are looking to have this program long term. So we're not just looking to have the grant come and go and the bonuses are gone. So we are looking at sponsorships, and we have a few from our chapter and from local businesses. And so we hope to grow that this next year. So that's part of my job. Also looking at other collaboration opportunities. There's actually a little bit of money on the grant to do some really cool things. I'm not sure how much like a bird cleaning station would go off well so far. It hasn't been very popular, and I totally understand. We are by Lake McConaughey, and I could imagine somebody coming off with like 15 geese and making a bit of a mess. But there's an opportunity there. Also dog-friendly areas. So I've had some communications with some gas stations and maybe even hotels to do that.
Okay.
So it's day-to-day. It really varies. It can be picking up stub signs. It could be a sponsorship opportunity. It could be more collaboration that I never even thought was possible.
Yeah, no, that's funny on the cleaning stations, because I have found some hotels in Nebraska where you go and you have signs on the doors that you can't clean them in your hotel bathroom. So, I've always found that to be funny.
Yeah, maybe that's an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and that's neat that you brought up like pet or dog-friendly areas or things like that, because in my mind, just thinking about this program, I would have thought it was just a monetary contribution that a business could provide, but it's actually far more than that.
Yeah, so we can kind of go both ways to work with them, and then even chatting with like the chamber, there's opportunities. Oh, if you're doing something that's good for tourism, there's money there. It's amazing how much there's opportunities when you really start digging into it, and you actually ask those questions, and that's not going to happen unless you go and see people and chat, and that's why they put my office in Ogallala to try to focus on that.
And I may have missed this. Is are NCAP dollars stacked on top of OFW dollars?
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually really exciting. So I'll kind of break it down. So basically, just imagine NCAP is a bonus on top of your Open Fields and Waters agreement. So we have a page, and you have like it's not really a signature page. It's more of you initial a couple things that's related to the contract. And then we have you signing everything through the Open Fields and Waters program. So specifically with NCAP, it's 5 years of walk-in hunting, and you can get 2 rates that we offer at the moment. So we have $25 one-time payment for quality CRP, and then we have $10 for rangeland or ungrazed grassland. So it has quite the impact, if you imagine, on the size of the property that may be enrolled. And that goes on top of your annual payment through the Open Fields and Waters. So if you're making $10 an acre on CRP, and we give you a bonus of, $25 an acre, you can imagine you might get, if you enrolled 100 acres, you could have a $2,500 bonus, and then you could be making, $1,000 every year for 5 years.
This is a great illustration of the innovation that I think is so important in ag-dominated landscapes for conservation, because ultimately there is no cookie-cutter approach, as we all know, to from one property to the next. But this is an illustration to me where you're able to think about like developing kind of like a stackable enterprise to some level. It's like you have different opportunities. In this case, you're getting different funding opportunities to help you optimize or maximize overall profitability on those properties. And that's the innovation we need, I think. And so it's really cool just to be able to talk through this and kind of think about how do we constantly, strive for that innovation? That's really what started this whole podcast, was the combination of connecting our conservation folks, our landowners across the state and beyond, and thinking about how in the 21st century do we drive innovation to optimize ag production and conservation. So this is really cool to talk through this.
So coming up on a year, how successful was year one of NCAP?
Yeah, so we actually had a goal of 25,000 acres new to public access within the 3 years of the grant. So, right, that was a pretty good goal. We were really excited to have a large ranch, and it was actually the first ever public access enroll in Arthur County and a little bit into Garden County. So in the end, and we had some other producers who were like, oh, you're giving a bonus now? And I'm already in Open Fields and Waters? Sure, I have a few more sections I can find, So we had quite a few people who were like, yeah, let's do it. And so in the end, for the first year, we had 29,000 acres new to public access, so never been in public access. And then in total, with some re-enrollments for 5 years, we had 44,000 acres
Really?
enrolled. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was,
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so we had to kind of change our goals a little.
Yeah,
I was like, wait, so the goal for 3 years was 25,000 acres, and you just blew that out of the water?
We did.
It
was, we were like, do we take it? Do we not take it? And like, why wouldn't we?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
There were some conversations there. I originally thought that landowner was going to enroll 10,000, which I was super excited about,
Oh, yeah.
And then he came back at me through a text message, which was like just blew my brain out. And I was, of course, in the middle of moving that day and then trying to figure out these conversations. Cool. It was really exciting. But
via text message, he lets you know he's enrolling how many thousands,
thousands
of acres?
He lives in Arthur County, and if anyone's been up there recently, there's no cell service in some of those places.
Sure.
So that's you do whatever works for the producer.
Absolutely.
That's very neat.
That's cool.
I always say producers selling conservation to other local producers is the way to go. Has this producer got you any other contracts, maybe neighbors or something, or is there any works to get his word out?
Yeah, so since that happened, and I think it'll probably hit more this year, that site got in just a little bit after, unfortunately, our stubble guide and everything else was printed. So you had to be going on the online public access atlas to see it, or using another platform like Onyx. So every time someone called, I let them know of that opportunity.
Sure.
But there's been a lot more, we heard about that. And, it doesn't take much to figure out what his probable payment is when you consider, it's $10 per acre for a bonus. And, we have different rates for our oat range land depending on where we're at and kind of what the quality is. But it's great looking stuff. And it's been really exciting to see. And it wasn't just, that opportunity. There's been a variety of CRP and other stuff that people, it's just coffee talk, right?
Sure.
They go and, gosh, they have this new program. I was able to get, another $1,000.
Sure.
It helps their bottom line. It brings people to the community, and everything it's just a benefit.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and that's cool. Like to your point, Nate, I think that's, letting the producers sell that as well, I think is so critical, because we can, in the conservation realm, especially me as a researcher, can kind of talk about all the research. But at the end of the day, it's those landowners on the ground, they're getting to kind of walk through those programs. So like, for example, maybe that person is early on, will be able to take and help guide other, neighbors or other, producers or landowners in that area and say, here's kind of, questions I had, went through the process. And then kind of help, dispel any, misconceptions or anything like that. But then it's kind of a producer-led, or landowner-led effort to some level. And we're kind of there to provide that support as needed. Mm-hmm. So that's cool to see. That's really awesome.
Yeah, it was really exciting.
I imagine so.
Yeah,
it's pretty exciting.
So you're also doing some fun competition stuff with centered around the NCAP program, right? This last year was the longest tail feather competition, right? Mm-hmm. Specifically for that program. Can you dive into that a little more?
Yeah, so I had a lot of fun with that. We wanted to kind of showcase the program, and with it being Pheasants Forever, we might as well focus on pheasants, right? Not even though we're all about it for all opportunities. So we had some yardsticks. I should have brought one in. Some yardsticks, and we had some funny sayings on them, like, you call that a tail feather, picks or it doesn't count, stuff like that, which actually was applicable this year. So basically you had to go, I worked with a couple gas stations, local gas stations, to put the yardsticks out, and I would just refill them kind of through the season. And you had to go to Ogallala to get a yardstick, and then you'd have to harvest a bird on public access.
Oh, okay.
And it didn't matter what type. I didn't care if it was NCAP or not. I just wanted, it could be stubble or whatever. We just had to have a picture of the bird with the sign and a tail feather on the yardstick, and you'd submit that into a form that we had on our website. And if you had a long tail feather, you won a kennel, which we had a nice Rufflin kennel that we were giving away. And I have one of those, and they're really nice. Your dog can't get out of them. I can guarantee you that. And then we had Tool Shields gift cards we gave away.
Oh, cool.
The winner this year was a gentleman who was living up in Llewellyn, harvested his bird in Garden County, because we were focusing in Keith, Garden, Dual, and Arthur County. Those are our focal.
Oh, sure.
Those are our focal counties. We do have secondary ones out there as well. But if you were in those areas and you shot a bird, you could submit. And one gentleman, at first we didn't really think it was real, but I had gone to the gas station to refill, and they were like, "Did you see that tail feather?" And I was like, I didn't see it, but they did, and they had actually seen it come in, and the guy grabbed a yardstick and go. It was 33.25 inches.
Wow.
And it's like the sheath of the tail feather was like 4 inches long. Like it was just like some crazy, just didn't stop growing. And
that's incredible.
Like the last 10 inches looked really spindly and weird, but.
Well, and we've had that on a few of our social media posts, haven't we? I saw it and I was like, what in the heck is that? Like that, it doesn't even seem real.
Yeah. Sure. That's crazy.
So we were able to get he submitted some photos. We were able to get a picture of him with the tail feather. His wife was like, he submitted it, so he gets to get a picture with it. So thankfully the wife, it was a good, that was also text message. It's funny how people want to contact me sometimes. So it was all back and forth, via text sometimes. But it was a really good and fun little deal. So,
are there plans to keep that going for the future?
Yes. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'm hoping to work and throughout some more of our counties, not just Ogallala. Probably within the 60 miles.
Sure.
But maybe move into We're now incorporating. So our secondary counties are like Lincoln, Cheyenne, parts of Morrill, Kimball, and Perkins County, and so. We're hoping we just actually expanded into Perkins County north of 23 this year.
Okay.
So see if we've already actually got potentially a lot of new to public access opportunities coming up. And so we're hoping, to continue to grow in our core counties. Sure. But since we had such success, we wanted to also have opportunities in some of these other places that are nearby.
Absolutely. So then long term, obviously this is kind of almost like a pilot study of the NCAP program where it's at in Ogallala, is kind of like the long-term vision, depending on funding, where you would want that to grow then to other, locations across the state of Nebraska, I'm assuming? Yes,
I would love to see it. I have some other places I'm eyeing. If we can, figure out a long-term funding opportunity,
sure.
Which that's my job, that's what I'm working on. And I think, we've got a pretty good idea of what kind of got to do. We would love to see this continue. Might not be at that, we have $800,000 level,
sure,
but it would still be bonuses in some kind.
Yep.
Cool. You mentioned the Rotary Club. Are they somehow able to keep tabs on dollars coming in to see if this makes a difference anyway?
I know the Chamber of Commerce is able to look at money related to hotel amenities. I haven't gotten to them yet about that. I probably should before the season really kicks up. But we had some conversations about that. Are you seeing an uptick, that you never saw before in the end of October? So that's something that I would like to personally dive into more because I'd like to see, how can we be improving?
Absolutely.
How can we get the word out? We've done such a good job showcasing Southwest Nebraska as the pheasant mecca. But what people don't know is it is a great opportunity, in the Panhandle as well. And
Sure.
It's really not far from some of our key key locales where people come from, like in Colorado.
Oh, absolutely.
So.
Yeah, they don't have to drive as far.
And to be honest with you, drought was really bad in Southwest Nebraska, and I've had way more success in Perkins and Keith County than I've had in the last 3 years in Southwest Nebraska. I went and I shot. When I finally got my one rooster in 22 and 23, I was like, that's it, I'm done. It's just not much for birds when there's a super dry year.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And I would definitely urge hunters to get out into the NCAP area because I had the opportunity to hunt some of that this year. And there were good sites enrolled. It was fun to see. So we got 2 of the 3 programs we want to cover today. Let's move into passing along the heritage program, the PATH program.
So I can give a little history on that. So that program was basically targeted to give youth hunters the opportunity and youth only. It's a great program in that sense. A mentor can basically jump on, reserve a site, and the youth hunter is the only one able to hunt. We give the landowner a flat rate payment. It's a pretty small flat payment, and then everything's administered through a website through a link on our website. And so right now we've got roughly a dozen sites that are open primarily in eastern Nebraska. Lake Wanahoo actually include, cool. Is probably, I think there's 5 or 6 of the dozen sites are right around the lake. And a lot of it's a safety factor. Being that close to big population centers, I think it'd be pretty overwhelmed if it was just open. And so that's where the PATH program fits fairly well. We're actually looking to kind of migrate all of those properties and the PATH program into a new reservation-based program that we're looking to kick off hopefully this fall. We're working with our software developers right now to be able to manage all this. But so sorry, Nate, we're kind of jumping into a whole nother program here. But,
you're just fine.
So the PATH program and the PATH properties will all become part of our managed access program or our MAP program. And long story short, basically this program is going to be similar to the Airbnb of public access programs. And so a landowner will be able to select the days open. They'll be able to select what species can be harvested or pursued. Anybody that is looking to access those properties will have to get permission through our website, have a printed off permission slip. The landowner will be notified of the hunter, their vehicle, everything, phone number. And so everybody will be in connection there. And then the landowner will actually get compensation for every user day that gets marked for that property or that site. So, and the way we're doing that is that a hunter, once they'll get 2 active reservations at any point during the year. So if you decide to reserve a weekend, you get a Saturday, Sunday, and you go hunt Saturday, you have to finish or complete a post-hunt survey by midnight Saturday in order to be able to make your next reservation on Monday or any other time after that. And so once that survey gets done, we get information on the site. We get a mark that as a user day for that property, and then we pay a landowner the incentive per user day at the end of the year. And so it's, right now, in theory, everything sounds great. I'm excited to see it roll out. It's certainly going to be a program we're going to have to learn a lot of things from. I've discussed this with, it'd be for sure 5, if not more, state coordinators surrounding us, and most other states have reservation-based systems. And every one of them has said, every year we go back to the drawing board because we find ways to make it better.
Sure, yeah.
We find ways people abuse it. We find ways that, we can facilitate access better to landowners, whatever. And so I'm excited to jump into that. I think we've got a really good framework moving forward on how this is going to work. I think it's really going to work well for some landowners, excuse me, that, don't really work for OFW.
Sure,
the Open Fields and Waters program. We've got 902 landowners, enrolled in the program, which is great. And we have a 93.5% retention rate, wow. So anytime somebody tries the program, it's, most likely they're going to return for a second year. And in most cases, they add more acres. But,
sure,
in some cases, folks want to know who's out there, or, it might be close to a residential area that, hey, we can't really just let everybody, so we're going to restrict it to archery turkey hunting only, or, sure. They can pick and choose what they want. But one of the big bonuses to this is going to be for depredation issues.
Sure.
Because we could have a landowner that says, we got a lot of interest in duck hunting. We got a lot of interest in the rifle deer season, but we got deer that are depredating on our corn and bean crops. We'd love to have somebody come out in January, but we can't let everybody come all year. This could be a good option for those folks.
Absolutely.
And so, we're finding more ways that this program is going to hopefully fit, and be able to tailor it to the needs of the landowner.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So just to make sure it makes sense in my mind, the passing along the hunting heritage program, or the PATH program, that is going into the managed access program. So the PATH program will be no more, right?
Correct. Yeah. We will have an option for a landowner to select youth hunting only or all hunters. And so the youth hunting option that's available in PATH will be available in the managed access program, and it'll all be online. It'll be one, source for all that information. They won't have to go to, 3 different websites to get our programs. Basically, you'll go right to our hunting tab. You'll find managed access. You'll register as managed access hunter. You'll be able to see the map, of those sites. And we're also working with Onyx, to develop a layer. It sounds like they will be able to, once we get things up and rolling, they'll be able to make like another toggle, like they have with OFW for managed access program. And so, the PATH program will be, basically discontinued once we get the MAP program up and rolling.
And I was just going to mention, I'm happy to hear that there's still going to be that youth option, because obviously in order to get youth interested in hunting, you have to get them opportunities more so than adults. Adults can get bored, but if you're not having opportunities for youth, good luck keeping them captivated.
For sure. As we know, without a place to go, how do we expect folks to get the next generation going on hunting?
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, a lot of our generation, to be honest, I think we're all within probably 10 years in age, but we just, a lot of our generation's losing connection to the farm.
Yep.
We just don't have those opportunities. Sitting around Thanksgiving dinner and get sick of looking at each other going, hey, let's go chase a bird. Well, it's, that's real, and I've run into that myself. So,
yep. Well, and hopefully, one of the other things I see, I just want to applaud you guys on the innovation of coming up with these creative ideas and thinking about new ways. Because as we talked about earlier, we have to think about innovative opportunities to get people afield and to create that sustainability, especially from a producer or landowner's perspective of, hey, I do have some land. Sure, this sounds like a reasonable opportunity, but like you said, kind of like the, hey, maybe I don't want somebody out there for the entire season. So that flexibility, I think, is something that I've talked to a lot of landowners that over the time being here in Nebraska, and that's something that people like is the flexibility. And so this is another illustration of that flexibility. The other thing I think is it's a great, as you mentioned, Adam, I love that point about Thanksgiving dinner, because really getting people outdoors and getting them connected back to the land. This is just another, these programs that provide those type of opportunities to get kids, for example, out there connected to the outdoors and thinking about the sustainability of those systems long term. And so, again, I applaud you guys for doing this, because this is great. And it's cool to see all these different innovative opportunities that you guys are pursuing every day. So,
and I want to circle back. You mentioned a 93% retention rate. Was that in regards to the Open Fields and Water program?
Correct. Yeah. So what we did there is, when I took this position and had a little more time to really look into how we were administratively, delivering this program, I'm like, this is something we've got to figure out. We know we have a high retention rate, but let's figure out how to measure it. And so year to year, as we draft new agreements for landowners, we also have some landowners that drop out of the program, and there's many reasons why. And so one thing we tracked was, obviously the losses that we had in a year, but also the reasons for the loss. And so in our little survey 1, 2, 3 survey that each of us do to develop that agreement, if we have a canceled agreement, we have to select the reason why. And I listed out, I think, 8 reasons. One of them is, change in management, property ownership change, CRP expiration. There's many different things in there, but one of them is dissatisfied with the program, meaning they left because they didn't like it. And we had 25 agreements that didn't renew into 2025 or 2024 going into last hunting season.
Oh, sure.
And none of them said they were dissatisfied with the program. It was either, again, an ownership change or a management change that prompted that cancellation. And so, but those 25 that came out to be just over 6% of our available contracts. So, 93.5% of the agreements went back into the program in 2024. So we'll be looking to measure the same thing this year. And, we're looking to learn from our producers, from our staff. Yep. And so, that's just one way we try to continue making the program better.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important. You're getting all that feedback and constantly striving to make essentially that product better and better. It's just like anything else in life that we, utilize. You have, like, for example, your phone. Like, it's not the same version that it was 15 years ago. They're constantly improving on those things, getting user feedback, figuring out, okay, well, people didn't like this. How do we kind of tweak that? How do we make this more, useful for individuals out there? And that's great. You guys are getting that type of data over. And 90, that's amazing. 93.5. That's great to see that kind of retention.
It's a big feather in the hat to our staff.
Oh, absolutely.
That's like Addie mentioned. They're not working with the government, they're working with Addie, they're working with our, our other biologists. And so that's pretty cool that we have that kind of return. And so
I'm curious, like, on, for example, like a change in ownership, do you then take and reach out to that and say new owner and say, here's kind of what this previous landowner, they had, why they did this, and kind of start that conversation with them since you already had stuff in the program? Or I'm just kind of curious how that works when you have those change ownerships and, trying to keep that property. Maybe it's been enrolled for a number of years in a program.
Yeah. So basically, if someone is taking over, contract, usually they have been informed.
Okay.
Yep.
Sure.
And so we go and chat with them. Is this something you want to continue to do? This is what the payments would be, and what the people did historically. A lot of times, it's usually like a family member taking over.
Okay.
Depending on their interests, they might have younger children. They might want to say, "Hey, actually, I'm not interested. I want to cancel." And
sure.
As long as, if it's just basic open fields and waters, that's perfectly fine. We can do that. If we are in NCAP, though, that NCAP bonus would have to be paid back.
Oh, okay.
Just because we're kind of paying up front for quality habitat. But the OFW payments wouldn't. So there's you kind of talk to people, the pros and cons of what program we want to look at. But, if they want to move forward, we just sign an agreement and get the appropriate paperwork, W-9s and everything, and let them know. We'll let them kind of have an idea. You'll probably see your payment around February and March and go from there.
That's cool.
And I think the 93% retention rate is awesome. But when you look at why people left, it wasn't because they were dissatisfied, which I think is even huge, a bigger accomplishment in my opinion.
Yep.
With that, are there any other points that you guys want to cover that we may have missed?
I tell you, there's one other program that we rolled out for this last year. It's our Elk Hunter Access Program.
Oh, sure.
And so we actually partnered with Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. They chipped in a good bit of funding to get the pilot going. Long story short, a lot of landowners, provide a great opportunity for once in a lifetime tags, and
oh, sure.
And and even as a general cow hunter, you can only draw that tag once in 5 years. So it's a pretty valuable opportunity, and our populations have grown. In most units, our tags have almost tripled in some cases in a lot of units. And so the demand for access has continued to increase, and a producer that may have typically gotten, 5-6 phone calls from hunters, we're maybe getting 30 or 40 in recent years.
Wow.
And so to where it's getting to be almost a burden,
Sure.
to the point where, once that draw date comes out in early July, a lot of those guys shut their phone off and they're like, I'm not going to deal with it. Well, so that was kind of on us to say, all right, well, let's figure out a way that we can make that, we can keep that opportunity there, and maybe reward the folks that are doing it in a way that's providing opportunity. And so this program is providing $1 per acre for folks that are willing to allow an adequate amount of general tag hunters on their property. So they still retain 100% control and access of their property. They give permission, but basically what we're paying them for is to answer the phone and allow so many of those folks to come in and hunt. And in 2024, this last year, we ended up enrolling about 25,000 acres.
Wow.
And when it was all said and done, we ended up with 16 elk harvested on those properties and over 150 hunter use days on those properties. Wow. And so we did have a good year there. We learned a lot, which is another thing. Anytime we're developing these programs, sure. I developed a committee. We had 3 or 4, people constantly giving comments on decisions we need to make. And, but overwhelmingly the program went over well. And like I said, we had 16, elk harvested, and just for comparison, last year we had less than 10 elk harvested on public land.
Oh, wow.
Statewide.
Wow.
And so, gosh. To think that we had 16.
That's pretty impressive.
Harvested.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
that's awesome.
And I mean, so I was talking with Luke Meduna, and I know you've had him on the podcast, but we were trying to figure out how many elk were harvested on public land this year to have this stat. And there was really only 5 that recorded either the WMA or the OFW property that, when they check an elk in, you can check private public land. You have to designate where you harvested, and only 5 that actually, put public land, but not everybody is going to be truthful either, where they harvested, if your public land's your sweet spot, you're probably not going to give that away. Well, we don't share that information either, but we figured less than 10 for sure. Wow. Were on public land. So that was kind of neat to see. So
that's awesome.
And so last year was the first year of the elk hunter access program as well.
Right.
How do you keep all this stuff straight?
Well, we got a lot of good staff, and Addie right there is a big reason for the success of NCAP for sure. But we got a lot of passionate people that are looking to do good things and keep opportunity on the landscape. We're all hunters too, and so we want to benefit ourselves just as much as we want to benefit the next hunter that's looking for public land. So we're looking to continue growing everything. Addie's got a lot of momentum going into year 2 with NCAP. The elk program, we're budgeting to double the acres this year. Hopefully we do. Obviously the Open Fields and Waters program is at an upward trend. We're looking to continue that. Hopefully managed access gets going until that rolls out. We're kind of waiting in queue. It's so far things have kind of been going the right direction. So it'll be fun to watch it grow.
Yeah, all good things. So where can a landowner go to learn more information about all these programs? And then where can they go to find somebody to help them get enrolled if they're interested? I
guess the first thing I would do is jump, most everybody's got either phone, computer right now. Just Google Nebraska Game and Parks Open Fields and Waters program, or Nebraska Game and Parks Public Hunting. There's a new video that just posted here in the last month on YouTube. It's about a 10-minute video that myself and our communications department, which they did a great job, by the way. Big shout out to our communications staff in Lincoln, especially Nick Savageau. He put together all the footage and pieced everything together. But that video really kind of explains the OFW program, very well. And it's got some great footage on it. You'll see a fair amount of familiar faces there. We did have an NCAP sign on there as well. So take a look at that. Reach out to staff. In the front of any one of our guides that we have, you can find our office numbers. Give that a call, and you'll get to a biologist that can take care of you.
And then where can they go for Pheasants Forever contact information, Addie?
Yep, just search Nebraska Pheasants Forever. Same thing. Hop on your phone, hop on a computer, go to our website. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see our Nebraska Community Access Partnership. click on that page. We actually have several we all can kind of enroll in NCAP.
Sure.
So it's not uncommon for us. We have Madison Fell out in Sydney. She's a game and parks biologist. Isaac Young is out of Enders, and he's kind of handling like Perkins County and some aspects of that. So I myself am a great contact. You just give me a shout. Always like I said, I take text messages too. Calls or texts, emails. My contact information is on the website. So that's where we can get some really great information.
That's really cool. Yeah, and I think one of the other things, going back to the partnerships, sometimes from a landowner's perspective, it's like, who do I call? And it's like, well, I hear Pheasants Forever, I hear Game and Parks, or hear all these different entities. Well, in reality, one of the nice things, and I've seen this since I've been here, is, all these partnerships that you guys have established are very strong. And I feel like, if you could connect them with somebody with Game and Parks if need be, or vice versa, but ultimately, if they reach out to any of you guys, if you just meet with the landowner and then you can kind of customize based on their interests and say, and we talked about this earlier, like, oh, hey, well, this person I know over here has been working with this landowner. We'll make sure we bring them into that conversation. So you kind of are all kind of collectively working together. And I think that's so important, because then it's not like you have to go one organization versus another and then you get confused on where to go. A lot of folks are interconnected, and I think that's such a cool thing. So,
yeah.
Well, Addie and Adam, I want to say thank you not only for being guests on here today and taking time out of your day, but thank you for the work that you do, because I know a number of my friends and family and myself, I've taken advantage of the public access program. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks for having me. And I guess as a parting shot, it's 1965 that Liability Act was started. I couldn't come up with that number.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot with that question there.
No, you did, but I was like, I should know that.
There you go. 1965. All right. Good deal.
Sounds good. Perfect.
Thanks again. We appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yep, thanks.
Wild Ag is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a review so others can find us and tune in.
And we want to hear from you. You can submit questions or topic suggestions to us at wildagpodcast@gmail.com. That's WILDAG podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.